religion, because it's from Babylon that false religion actually comes from. It's the place from where Daniel speaks. He says that there is a lion, but it's not the Lion of Judah. It's where Antichrist will come out of, that region of Iran, Iraq, the false Christ. So as we read the Bible and we identify Babylon, what it's saying in the last days when God says he remembers Babylon, he's not talking about literally a geographic place as much as he's talking about that which Daniel speaks of when he interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, speaking of the image from head to toe that represents the nations, and that image does not fall, or its influence throughout human history is not over until that stone kingdom, which is the kingdom of Jesus, strikes the imagery or strikes that government in the foot, causes that miry clay mixed with iron, that reconstituted Roman Empire, causes it to crumble and fall, so that we see everything from the head all the way down also collapsing. Jesus thus setting up his government after that. Now it's no mystery that by reading the last portion of Revelation, as we read about these vials of wrath that are being poured out, not only were the seals broken and the wrath of God manifest through the seals, but we also had these vials that were poured out. So God having three distinct judgments, three distinct separate judgments coming on the people. The Bible says in Zechariah that God was going to tribulate the Jews so they can look on him whom they pierced. But having three aspects of his wrath poured out on the people. When the last vial is poured out, it says suddenly God remembers Babylon, and he has something special in store for it. Now again, Babylon during that time is not even the focus point, because it's Jerusalem, the place where the temple set up, the Antichrist there. But God remembers Babylon, not the geographic location, but God remembers the influence, that which Babylon inspired, that which reaches through history even till today and captivates even the church. As we read the description, and you have it in your little notebooks, the criteria by which we identify Babylon: she sleeps with everybody. She's a harlot. She captivates not only the people of God, the church of God, kings, nations, and everybody, but she possesses everything that man desires. So Babylon comes to represent that which men are always pursuing, that which we need, that which we desire, those things that our soul lusts after. Those are the things represented in Babylon. As we read the passages in the book of Revelation, God describes to a T what Babylon is. Everything that we want, everything we desire, everything in life that we strive to achieve for, those are the things that Babylon represents. Those are the things that she actually holds. Those are the things that Babylon lures us with. And it's not until the end times when God crushes Babylon, brings that crushing blow to that Babylonian system, that it says everybody cries and everybody steps back from her in fear that what happened to her may happen to us. God makes it plain that Babylon is not just some nation, but that it's a thing. It's a system. And I think many of us have already come to find that this system is even more far-reaching than we thought. Now, we were talking about I think the last time we met, we were talking about the Rothschild family, and we were talking about how the patriarch, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, established his 5 sons to literally run the banking empire of Europe. We left off with the notion, we left off with the idea that while in fact Europe had been taken as far as the banks are concerned, the Bank of Italy wasn't run by the Italians, it was run by a private banking family. The Bank of London was no longer run by not even the English crown. It was literally run by now a Rothschild family member. The bank in Vienna, same thing. These are all family-owned banks, but now they are focusing their attention on the U.S. because now we have this runaway brother of England that has established itself as a nation. And not only has it established itself as a nation, but this conglomerate of states is now growing to such an extent that it is obvious to the world that this is going to become the power of the future. And one of the problems that they viewed the U.S. as was that it was not holding to the same system of money that Europe was. Despite the fact that it was the breakaway brother of England, and we know better from reading Genesis, the latter portions of the chapter, from chapter 38 on, we read the end of Deuteronomy. The literal separation of Ephraim from Manasseh. The younger brother jumping over the wall is what is described in the prophecy. We see that suddenly there's a problem in that Europe is in the hands of these bankers, and yet America's still rogue in that it still has its own financial system. Now, I'm going to read tonight out of Rule by Secrecy, and then what you're holding there is Shadows of Power by James Perloff. We'll read some of that also. Something that I think we haven't read that we'll read today. I told you that, if anything, what Rule by Secrecy is, this is the program. When you go into the game, you need to know who's playing shortstop. You want to know who the pitcher is. You want to know what their batting averages are. You want to know who's involved in this game. That's what Rule by Secrecy does for us. Rule by Secrecy gives you a rundown, tells you who's everybody. I've got some pages that we'll be copying. In fact, I've already got them done. I just got to throw them on the copier, and I'll give you a set of these too. That way you have something to read. All right, we're going to read a portion of the introduction that's actually called Rule by the Few. This is something that many people in America, you never get taught. And this is why I tell you, sometimes what we learned in school isn't even the truth. What we learned in school is nothing more than a picture of a landscape that we're told is our history, but it isn't. Our history as a people does not begin in 1492 with Columbus. That's not where it starts, but this is what we're told. You know, these things that happen after Columbus lands, and then we hear about the Pilgrims. They land on Plymouth Rock, and this is the inception of America. Yet it's not the inception of America. This was a British colony. If anything, our early history, that which we record, is nothing more than an extension of English history, Scottish history, Irish history, but not American history. But we get told these things, and we're taught these things as kids. We're taught classes in civics, and later on we grow up and find out that much of what we refer to as civics and politics isn't what we thought it was. And for that matter, many people decide they're just going to drop out of the system and not even concern themselves with things as simple as voting. This is actually an ideal. Elites, not masses, govern America, concluded academics. Thomas R. Dye and Harman Ziegler, in their book, The Irony of Democracy. In an industrial, scientific, and nuclear age, life in a democracy, just as in a totalitarian society, is shaped only by a handful of men. In spite of differences in their approach to study power in America, scholars, political scientists, sociologists alike agree that the key political, economic, and social decisions are made by tiny minorities. Now, we're going to read another book, and I think I put it on the bibliography that Tina typed up for us. But it's a book that's actually called Conflict of Visions. And in conjunction with a few other books that we're going to read, you're going to find out that while we're fighting over political ideologies, while we're fighting over a Democratic agenda or a Republican agenda or even a Libertarian agenda or a Green agenda, whatever the agenda that we view politically, that is something that the system has designed to literally have us fighting at a lower level of conflict while the decisions are all made up at higher levels. When we talk about a rule by the few, not only are we talking about a few people that have money and power, but we're talking about a few people who literally feel that their destiny in God is to lead the masses. So when we talk about the few, what we're also dealing with are the few enlightened. Because you cannot place yourself in a position of any sort of rulership. I don't care what it is. You can be in charge of a dog kennel. But the only reason you're in charge of the dog kennel is because you feel that you are enlightened to the extent that other people don't know what you know about running kennels or running dogs. So as a result of this, you become the head of the kennel. When it comes to bodybuilding, Charles can say, I'm in charge of this gym's bodybuilding, philosophy, and workout and training. Why? Because he knows a little bit about that. So his enlightenment is what puts him in that category that we refer to as the few. And this is exactly what America has become, despite what we're told is this great democracy, this great ideal that we vote for somebody who is adversarial with another party that is going to rule us. This is simply what is referred to as rule by the few, but what is left out of the ideology is that these few are the few enlightened, that these few are the anointed, to use a Christian term, that it is a destiny, almost as if it were a prophetic destiny to lead. It's not just a matter of ruling by the few. We've talked about this, and we'll probably talk about it as we go on, but whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, Green, or you might just be a commie. I don't care. All right? The ruler of each party belongs to that group referred to as the few. So while they pursue the means of their anointing or their vision, because every one of these visions, the end is the same. Total rulership, rule by the few, subjected masses, yet they all have a different title, which gives us the impression that they're all different. And as we read and as we find out, we're going to learn that these people are all part of the same organizations that have one common viewpoint in life. And it's that viewpoint of the few, the viewpoint of the enlightened. Now, how many of you already feel like dirtbags knowing that these few are referred to as the illuminated or the enlightened? They know what you don't know and what you'll never know. They tread on ground you'll never step on. They see things you'll never see. They know things you'll never know. And because of that, they have this right to literally control the world, control your world, determine who's poor, determine where the wealth goes, determine who suffers, determine who dies, determine whose businesses rise depending on what they desire. They can determine whose business crashes and not have a conscience about it. This is why God hates these people. You think God hates Philistines, you ought to hear the stuff God says in the major prophets about these folk. Rather than to reach out their hand to help, they stepped on them. This is why God hates these folk. So first things first, we got to establish that which we've learned, that which we've taken in, and this is why a lot of people look at me when we talk about certain things, they say, you've got a cynical viewpoint to a lot of things. It's not that I'm cynical. There comes a point where you just know too much. There comes a point where you just recognize what's taking place. Everybody's crying the blues about Al Gore and George Bush in this election. Both sides are writing books already talking about how one guy's a crook, one guy's a cheater, one guy robbed the presidency. Everybody's talking about that. Does anybody have any idea that both these individuals belong to the same organizations with the same goals? They're just going to get there by 2 different streets. Huh? Danny lives out pretty much the same neck of the woods I do. But they come up down the street, I come up on the freeway. We both get to the same place. Now somebody might say, personally, I like the freeways. I'll go with Daniel. Somebody else says, well, the road over there where Danny goes is more scenic, plus Starbucks is on the way. Huh? Starbucks, McDonald's, tacos. I think there's more benefits with Danny. Huh? Daniel's going to get us there, but it's going to be a little more dangerous, a little faster. And thus our ideologies kick in. We're going to have a bunch of people want to follow me, a bunch of people want to follow Danny, but for various reasons. But what happens? We're all going to the same place. And while the people are arguing which way is better, which way is faster, which way benefits us more, they're both going to the same place. Now, doesn't that drive you crazy? Specifically because literally you can draw dividing political lines by race. You know that, don't you? White people usually what? White people that work usually what is their political affiliation? Oh, they're Republicans. How'd you know that? Huh? How about black people? How few? When you talk about black people, what are you looking at? Democrats. When you're looking at Hispanics, what are you looking at? Why? Huh? It's economics. Huh? Nobody likes to talk about it, but it's economics. In fact, when you talk to most people about the political ideologies of the party they claim to embrace, you know what happens? They can't. Then you find out that both of them have the exact same goal, the same end in mind, that they both belong to the same societies, the same ideological societies, the same groups, and then it just gets you mad. That's why I tell you, and I've told you before, voting is good because you get to choose who screws you. All right. Elites, not masses, govern America, concludes academics Thomas R. Dye and Harman Zingler in their book, The Irony of Democracy. And in the industrial scientific nuclear age, life in a democracy, just as in any other totalitarian society, is shaped by a handful of men. In spite of differences in their approach to the study of power in America, scholars, political scientists, sociologists alike, they agree the key political, economic, and social decisions are made by tiny minorities. The idea that a small, wealthy ruling elite, an oligarchy, controls America appears to be well supported by facts. A disproportionate amount of America's resources is controlled by a handful of its 265 million population. In a 1983 study by the Federal Reserve Board, a mere 2% of U.S. families control 54% of the nation's wealth. 10% of the people own 86% of the net financial assets. The majority of American families, 55%, have zero or negative net worth. This study excluded the net worth of institutions, most of them that are owned and controlled by the above-mentioned 2%. The cycle of the rich getting richer while poor getting poorer has been accelerating since the 1960s through both Republican and Democratic administrations. And even that statement is broad. You have to be at least understanding enough to see through the logic. But when people talk about the poor getting poorer, I think we see a poor segment of society that's disenfranchised. But when I was growing up, I guess looking back, I guess to an extent we were poor, but we ain't poor no more. And a lot of you were the same way. Grew up in certain neighborhoods that were considered poor, and you ain't poor anymore. So when somebody says, oh, the rich get richer, poor get poorer, does your family get poorer, or are they doing better off? Huh? So the poor ain't getting poorer, but what's happening, or the description or the statement, the poor are getting poorer, is you're looking now at the poor society, or those people at the bottom caste of society, and you're looking at them thinking, I thought I had it bad. Those people really got it bad. All right? So it's not that there's more poor people. Is that the poor just have less. And one of the reasons they have less is because the system is what's doling out the goods now. That's another subject. People get mad when you talk about that. You give people welfare, they don't want to get up and go to work anymore. Give people Social Security, they don't want to work anymore. You want to give them disability, they don't go to work anymore. You create nothing but a class of useless, worthless people. They don't have any such thing in other countries. If you hurt your back, you go to work hurting. If your head hurts, you still work. You go out and farm corn and grow llamas, whatever. All right? If your lifestyle depends on going out and picking up rocks to build shacks, that's what you do. You go out and build rocks. You don't care if your toe hurts. Care less if your throat hurts. I better shut up, huh? What do you think happened in the early pioneer days when none of that existed? Who took care of mom and dad? Huh? Wasn't Social Security. There was no convalescent homes. Huh? From 1992 to 94, wealthiest 5% share of the wealthiest 5% share of the national income rose 14%, nearly twice that of everybody else's gain during the previous 25 years. Current figures are even more gruesome. The average worker's median pay in 1998, adjusted for inflation, is $1 below 1973's hourly rate. During the past 20 years, the income gaps between males with a college education and those with none grew 42%, from 42% to 89%. Union jobs have borne the brunt of this downside. 1970s, unions representing steel auto workers counted nearly for 3 million members. Today, it's below 1 million. So, in essence, school is a must. Now, as we go on and read, I'm a proponent for school, but one of the things is that I've said it before, there's a separation in classes of people, not by what they are, but by what they know. So, if somebody knows, they become a part of that upper crust. If they don't know, you're going to be wearing jumpsuits. All right? We have evolved into a two-tier society where people in the knowledge industries prosper. Those without college education or technical skills fall by the wayside. Noted U.S. News and World Report's editor-in-chief, Mortimer B. Zuckerman. Many are now questioning if this winnowing of the American middle class is truly a natural evolution or a conscious planning for a new world order. Now, what did we read in about 3 books a couple weeks ago? That nothing happens by accident. If it happens, it was what? Planned. All right? It is widely reported in the United States that the United States uses the world's natural resources far out of proportion to its percentage of the planet's population. It is also an uncontested fact that as the new millennium dawns, the United States also stands alone as the world's preeminent power. So who really controls the United States and hence the world? Everyone's heard how they own the vast majority of resources, manipulate stocks, control prices, avoid taxes. They also maintain monopolies over energy, medicine, armaments, and manufacturing, and by suppressing new technologies. And they wield undue influence over the news media and the world governments with their control of multinational corporations as private organizations such as England's Royal Institute of International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. They also belong to secret societies such as the Illuminati, Skull and Bones, Knights of Malta, the inner circles of Freemasonry. But who exactly are they? Who are the men? Few women seem to be included that may well control the destiny of the planet Earth. Why do they act in secrecy? Why are they attracted to secret organizations? What secrets do they possess that allow them to assume the role of the ruling elite? More important, what are their goals and agenda? We'll stop there. So the question is, who are they? And the question is, what is their agenda? There is no doubt that anybody who's been on the planet long enough figures out that all of this stuff that we just read is true. You don't have to decide whether or not you believe this. You know, if people want to sit and ponder and say, I don't believe a lick of that, that's okay. You just go on. It's all right to be asleep. Next chapter, called A View from the Few. It has not only been a fringe conspiracy theorists who have spoken out about hidden control of the world. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, as far back as 1856, told the House of Commons, "It is useless to deny, because it's impossible to conceal, that a great part of Europe, the whole of Italy, France, and a great portion of then fragmented Germany, to say nothing of other countries, is covered by a network of these secret societies. And what are their objects? They do not attempt to conceal them. They do not want a constitutional government. They want to change the tenure of the land, to drive out the present owners of the soil, and to put an end to ecclesiastical establishments." Now, that means the church. So there's a three-pronged move here. And this is why I always say, the Antichrist cannot manifest until they undo our Bill of Rights, move out our constitutional rights. The church has to be taken out of the way before Antichrist comes. Isn't that funny that these people have a very similar agenda to the Antichrist? Huh? Now, this is what the British Prime Minister said way back in 1856. Now, remember, he says the whole of Italy and France and portions of now fragmented Germany. Who's running the banking systems in those 3 countries? The Rothschilds. So somebody finally's taken notice, hey, somebody running the show. The British Prime Minister who knew who was running England. They do not want a constitutional government. They want to change the tenure of the land. Literally, they want to take God's job. They want to be the landlords. This is why it's important. This is why you always hear me continually saying, today, I'm not going to go up to people and complain. I don't like the system. I don't like welfare. I don't like this welfare mentality. I don't like that mentality where people think that the government or anybody owes them anything. I get sick every time I turn on the radio and I find out that somebody else is suing the World Trade Center. Some terrorist slams an airplane into a building and now somebody wants to sue. And Hillary Clinton comes out on television today and she's saying, well, there was a lot of illegal aliens that were working in there and their families need to get some money. What the hell's wrong with that woman? What part of illegal aliens does she not understand? If they're illegal, they ain't supposed to be here. That's against the law. Now, where do people get this sense of entitlement that somebody owes them something? Huh? They want to change the tenure of the land. What does that mean? that they want to be the landlords. It's like Russia. They dole out the property. They give you the apartment if you're good. If you're real good, you might get a house. They dole it out. They give you your Section 8 housing. They tell you what neighborhood you can live in. They point out the house, the shack, the condo. They tell you. They're the landlords. You don't get a choice. They want to change the tenure of the land. I get mad. I don't like any of this. This mentality that every time somebody trips on a water hose, you got to sue somebody. Somebody owes you. Where's this? What is this about? This is about getting money for nothing. See, God said, I am the Lord. That's why, as we've been reading on Sunday, He doled out the land. You work the land God gives you, and He'll prosper you. You give Him the tenth from what comes in from the land, and God will prosper you. God's the landlord. But we live in a society now where you say, well, I don't want to be bogged down with, physical assets. I'll just rent an apartment. I'll just broker deals. I don't have to carry nothing. I'm going to be like Amazon. I just want to be in the middle of the deal. You need a book? I ain't stocking it, but I'll get you the book. Nobody wants land. They just want bread. Now, if nobody wants land and everybody wants bread, then you need somebody at the top, one of these enlightened few, one of these anointed with these great visions to dole it out. Right? Some of you learn the hard way, how politicians work. You vote them in, and you got this broad brush stroke of politics in your mind that says, other people, for the people. He represents us. 10,000 of us said, we don't want a nuclear power plant in our backyard. And he says, well, look, you appointed me, and you appointed me because you trust me, and because I'm enlightened, I'm experienced, I'm a lawyer, I'm smarter than you, I'm in office, I'm the one in the power, and I'm the one that's got, every one of those lobbyists' hands in my pocket, putting stuff in, so we're going to do it. Because y'all don't know better, but, when there's 20,000 more jobs here in 20 years, you'll all thank me. But y'all too short-sighted to see this, and even though this is a representative government, your ideas and my ideas don't go together, so I'm going to do what I think is right for my constituency. That's the way it works. All right? Now, you can go have a recall if you want. You're just going to throw a wrench in? We're just going to make it happen? You're just going to delay the inevitable. So this whole idea of the enlightenment by the few, see, people don't want land, they want bread. This is what our country is today. You can't change that. I can't change that. I can hate the idea. Has nothing to do with God. Has nothing to do with God's system. Has nothing to do with the true intention of our Constitution and our founding fathers. Has nothing to do with it. But our people want bread. That's why they all cry. Remember Al Gore? Social Security in a locked box. Huh? Why does Social Security become such a tough issue? Oh, because that's my bread. That's my cheese. Huh? That's my cheese. And the government owes it to me. Why? Sense of entitlement. That's what these people want to do. They want to change the tenure of the land. They want to change the ideas. They don't want you to own property. They want to dole it out. They don't think anybody has the smarts to know what to do with land, so they're going to tell you what to do with it. They want to drive out the present owners of the soil. They want to also put an end to ecclesiastical establishments. They don't like churches. Now, I don't know about you, but that's the part that drives me crazy. See, we get told things like, church should not be narrow-minded. We need to hate some folk. We need to hate these people. You could have been in Israel during the time of the possession of the land. And when you walked into that land, you better hate Philistines. You better hate Hittites. You better hate Jebusites. You better hate Hivites. You better hate all of them. Because God says to kill them all and dispossess them of the land God's going to give you. Now people get all upset. I can't believe you're talking about that. There's some folk you need to hate. There's some folk we need to actually glory in when it's time for God to put His foot on their necks. Tell me you like the idea that these people put some of your relatives through a depression and didn't even lift a finger to help them. Huh? The people die, lose their businesses, get screwed over by the IRS, and we're supposed to go along with it? That's evil. They hate the church. I got nothing but contempt for people like this. Huh? President Woodrow Wilson, who, as will be seen, was intimately connected with these conspiratorial powers, wrote some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, and they're afraid of something. They know there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter once revealed, the great rulers in Washington are invisible. They exercise power from behind the scenes. Isn't this what 2nd Ezra said? 2nd Ezra said that God was going to deal with the power that sat behind the power. That big three-headed bird that was talking, but the voice wasn't coming from the head. Huh? Something else is running the show? That's the way Washington is. That means every time you see George, he talks, but the voice ain't coming from George. Huh? So what difference does it make if it's Al? Al talks and it's not coming from that block of wood. Let's see. In a letter dated November 23rd, 1933, newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote to President Woodrow Wilson's top advisor, Colonel Edward House, the real truth of the matter is, as you know and I know, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Money rules. Roosevelt's son Eliot wrote, there are within our world perhaps only a dozen organizations which shape the courses of our various destinies as rigidly and as regularly as constituted governments. Warnings about a secret government in the United States have been voiced by many people over the years. Former New York Mayor John F. Hyland stated in 1922, the real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over our city, state, and nation. As the head of this octopus, at the head of the octopus is the Rockefeller Standard Oil Interest, and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers, who virtually ran the U.S. government for their own selfish purposes. Colonel L. Fletcher Poutrey served as the focal point liaison between the Pentagon and the CIA from 1955 to 63. From his vantage point, Prouty was able to witness control of mechanisms over both intelligence and the military. I've told you before, the role of CIA, FBI, all these intelligence gathering networks, they're not there for the protection of our people or our government. They're there for the protection of our financial interests. And when I say our, I speak of our as a nation. We view them as ours, but they're not ours. They belong to these private individuals. So when you look at all these movies about espionage and, protection of the American citizens, that's bullcrap. About the only thing they're interested in is protecting their investment dollars overseas. Writing in 1973, Prouty said that the United States is run by a secret team, an inner sanctum of a new religious order, answerable only to themselves. This power of the team derives from its vast intergovernmental undercover infrastructure and its direct relationship with great private industries, mutual funds, investment houses, universities, and mass media, including foreign and domestic publishing houses. Now, why is it important for these people to own all the newspapers and all the TV stations? So they can tell you. Now, listen, they can't tell you what to think, but they can tell you what to think about. Right? You don't watch the news and say, oh, I'm going to think about this. You don't pick up the paper, read it, and say, oh, I'm going to think about this all day. You pick it up, and by the suggestion, the fact that they put it on the newspaper, you think out of thousands of things that are happening in a day, well, this must be important. So they don't tell you what to think. They just tell you what to think about. All right? That's like that jerk who wants to sue the government because the way we're treating them Afghan prisoners in Cuba. Huh? I'd love to be on a Caribbean island about right now. Huh? It's cold out here. Here you got people that wear nothing but a skirt and a funny little hat, living at 11,000-foot elevations at Tora Bora, could care less about the elements, and now suddenly some jackass says, oh, they might be cold because they're being left outdoors. These people live outdoors. Huh? These people are in the equivalent of the Holiday Inn, man. The news don't tell us what to think. They tell us what to think about. People run all the shows. I like the fact that he refers to it as the inner sanctum of a new religious order. Because that's what it is. It's a religious order. It's literally a government of an enlightened few. All true members of the team remain in the power center, whether in office with an incumbent administration or out of the office with the hardcore set. Now, isn't that something? That you can be in office, but you're not part of the hardcore set. What does that tell you about the politicians? They're not the real powers. All right? Now, have you ever noticed that every time a new administration comes into Washington, they pick and choose their cabinet members? Does anybody ever see where these cabinet members come from? These cabinet members come out of these huge corporations. And they literally move in and out of politics even throughout administrations. See, a lot of people don't like Dick Cheney because he's been around several administrations. I still remember when Ronald Reagan said, I want Alexander Haig, and nobody liked Alexander Haig because he was one of the fellas bombing Cambodia. Huh? Everybody remembered Alexander Haig from dropping bombs on Laos and Cambodia when we weren't at war with Laos and Cambodia. So isn't that funny how these people move in and out of politics? Everybody knows who Henry Kissinger is, don't you? Henry Kissinger wasn't a politician. He became a cabinet member, cabinet appointed position from out of some of these groups. So as you observe cabinet positions, these people literally move out of what they refer to as the hardcore set into office, where in that office they do what? They exercise the vision of what we will call the anointed. That select few, those enlightened few, that are going to tell us what's right for us. All right. All true members of the team remain in the power center, whether in office with the incumbent administration or out of office with the hardcore set. They simply rotate to and from official jobs and the business world or the pleasant haven of academia. Prouty wrote, this great machine has been constructed by such able men such as Wild Bill Donovan, Clark Clifford, Walter Bedell Smith, Allen Dulles, Maxwell Taylor, George McBundy, and many others who have gilded it and molded it into the runaway giant that it is today. It is big business, big government, big money, big pressure, all operating self-centered, utterly self-serving, security and secrecy. The skeptic should note how many of these same names will continually crop up in connection with modern secret societies. The great innovative thinker R. Buckminster Fuller also came to understand the United States is ruled by powerful men behind the scenes. The USA is not run by its would-be democratic government. He wrote shortly before his death in 1983, nothing can be more pathetic than the role that has to be played by the President of the United States, whose power is approximately zero. Nevertheless, the news media and most over 30 years of age in the U.S. carry on as if the President has the supreme power. And if it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. Another insider who confirmed that a plot was afoot was America's first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, who may have paid with his life for his forthrightness. Beginning in 1947, Forrestal voiced his concern that the government leaders were consistently making concessions to the Soviets. He had amassed more than 3,000 pages of notes, which he told a friend would be turned into a book to expose the real motives of his superiors. These men are not incompetent or stupid. They are crafty and brilliant. Consistency has never been a mark of stupidity. If they were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor, he noted. Forrestal, who was privy to many secrets, he was listed as an original member of the super-secret group in charge of UFO issues, according to the controversial MJ-12 documents. Resigned his office at the request of President Truman, March 2nd, 1949. 2 months later, again at the request of Truman, Forrestal entered the Bethesda Naval Hospital for routine examination. The doctor assured his brother that Forrestal was well, but refused to either allow his brother or the family to come see him, or the priest. On the day that his brother came to take him from the hospital, Forrestal's body was never found on the lower floor of the hospital, was found with a rope around his neck. Must have been depressed. They just didn't see it. Officials claim Forrestal committed suicide. Many people, both now and then, disbelieve this verdict. Poor guy. Harry Truman just wanted him to be well. Although various officials claim Forrestal was insane at the time, that's what they always say about you. You're always insane. All right? It's like everybody tells you about homeless people. Now, when a homeless person kills somebody, he's not homeless anymore. He's a drifter. Huh? You got to know the language, right? He's not a homeless person. He's a transient. Huh? You ever notice that? Somebody tell me what the difference is between a drifter, a homeless person, and a transient. Huh? But see, homeless people need money, right? Homeless people need soup cans. Homeless people need your help. But when these people flip out and lose it and go do stuff like that, they're not homeless anymore. They're transients. Huh? So when a politician decides he wants to snitch, all of a sudden they're insane. Now, do you know in Russia, again, you got to understand a little bit about Russia, but in Russia, if you spoke ill about the government, you weren't imprisoned, because if you're imprisoned, they have to charge you with violating a law, and if you violate the law, there's a prescribed sentence or set of time that you serve. So if you spoke ill about the government, they wouldn't charge you with a crime. They would declare you insane. And when you're insane, you never get out. See, they don't want you coming out after 10 years, because then you'll just start talking again. So they declare you insane. And you never come out. So what's the best way to keep the truth from coming out in America? You make them insane. That's why when somebody's about to blow the whistle, they always end up in ill health on Thorazine. Huh? IV drips. You don't think that's true? Huh? All right. Although various officials claim Forrestal was insane at the time, his unbalanced state must have provoked an ability to see the future. Just before leaving Bethesda, Forrestal told a friend that the American soldiers would soon be dying in Korea. This statement came 15 months before North Koreans launched a surprise attack on the South. Another crazy man who voiced a prophetic vision of war was Senator Joseph McCarthy, who mistook evidence of a worldwide conspiracy as a support for his own prejudice against communism. Everybody knows about McCarthy, right? McCarthy, who caused such misery in his misguided and zealous attack on communism, nevertheless was on track in his assessment of the conspiracy to promote war for profit. He charged that the Yalta Agreements of 1945 between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin were behind the conflicts of the post-war world. The secret agreements between these world leaders, among them the ceding of Eastern Europe to Stalin, the Middle East to Britain, the Pacific and Southeast Asian region to America, were confirmed in the mid-1970s by the release of some of Churchill's papers and correspondence. Now, by today, everybody understands how Russia got financed. Everybody knows how Stalin made his way back into Russia, into Petrograd. He was financed by the West. Everybody knew it. So though McCarthy was off base in his zeal against communism, if you poison the whole well, what happens? Nobody accepts anything he said. And much of what he said was true. September 23, 1950, McCarthy stated, here at Yalta was signed a death warrant of the young men who are dying today in the hills and the valleys of Korea. Here was signed a death warrant of the young men who will die tomorrow in the jungles of Indochina, later called Vietnam. How can we account for our present situation unless we believe that men in high government are concerting to deliver us to disaster? This must be the product of a great conspiracy, a conspiracy on a scale so immense as to dwarf any previous such ventures in the history of man. McCarthy warned, what can be made of this unbroken series of decisions and acts of contribution to the strategy of defeat? They cannot be attributed to incompetence. Commentators like Noam Chomsky, and if you ever get a chance to pick up his material, he's a literature professor at MIT, so you're not dealing with some flunky. Noam Chomsky, Gore Vidal have spoken out against the national security state from the left. The late Senator Barry Goldwater and evangelist Pat Robertson have spoken out from the right. Even mainstream centrists like commentator Bill Moyers and attorney Jerry Spence have warned of a secret government. When historical figures, along with concerned citizens from opposite ends of the political spectrum, say the same thing, it's time to start paying close attention to what's going on in the nation today. Authors David Wise, Thomas B. Ross wrote of such matters in the early 1960s in their books called The Invisible Government, which the CIA attempted to suppress. They warned that secret government agencies had financial connections to foundations and universities, and that they used American businesses to cover up for their operations in direct violation of their charters. More recently, the authors wrote, nothing has happened to persuade us that the danger of an invisible government in an open society has in any way been diminished. Let's see. We're going to get to that part too, but the grants that are actually awarded to universities basically perpetuate the ideologies of these elite, anointed, enlightened few. And this is why today the probably best recognized subject of the university is America sucks. All right? Bad country. We're responsible for everything that happens. Right? Isn't that what they tell us? Huh? Our foreign policy is bad. It's our fault they're poor. It ain't our fault they're poor. Huh? They live in the freaking desert. Huh? That's our fault? All right. We'll leave off there. Let's take a look at what. Let's see. Shadows of Power. You're holding the paper there. Chapter 2. Backgrounds to the beginning. Following chapters in Rule by Secrecy start to identify some of these secret societies that are actually active in our country that many of our top politicians and top position cabinet members are members of. But we're going to read background at the beginning. International bankers, one who among other things loans money to governments and nations. We read about that when we talked about the Rothschild family, how their goal was not to lend to people. It's small time. They want to lend to nations. Lending to governments can be particularly profitable for several reasons. First, the government borrows far more than individual or business. Second, the government has unique tools with which it can guarantee repayment, such as levying of taxes. Third, the government may require debt through a medium more desirable than cash by granting the banker certain privileges. For example, giving him say in policy. And we read about that in Tragedy and Hope, that the idea behind lending money to nations was that if the king didn't pay, what you did was you lent money to his enemy to rise his enemy up to literally take over. Just as you rise up his enemy, the king says, okay, I give up, and he borrows more money to defend himself now against the proliferation that you caused by lending the other nation money. All right, so you put him further into debt. Now that he's in your debt, what do you hold as collateral? Nothing more than saying his foreign policy. You tell him who to deal with. You tell him what he can do, what he can't do. So suddenly the king has no power. This is why when we read the book of Revelation, the Bible says, we read this in the end times. Here you have Babylon, this great harlot, as she rides these seven-headed beasts, these nations. As she rides this, it says that the men hate her. Kings of the earth hate her. Remember that? Why do they hate her? Because they realized that she had all the power and they didn't have any. They hate her. God put it in their heart to hate her. All right? Again, maybe we can toss this in right now. It was during the beginnings of the Federal Reserve Plan that prior to instituting this Federal Reserve Plan, there had to be set in position, or there had to be set in place a means by which America can actually begin to repay these international loans. Thus, federal income tax was established and levied on the people. Before you can actually have international bankers come in and drop all kinds of money, there has to be a way or a means of income. And this is why it was necessary that a federal income tax be imposed. All right? So those of you that think federal income tax was imposed so that our federal government can run and operate, and it's baloney. Federal government ran and operated even with the states levying taxes on their own, each individual. Federal government operated. It was actually levied. The federal income tax came in strictly to support, actually strictly as a result of these international bankers meddling with our politics. All right, all of these presidents that people told us were great heroes, guys like Woodrow Wilson, he's probably one of the biggest good-for-nothing, low-down pieces of crap that you'll ever study. Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, the New Deal. Let's change the language. It's the raw deal. All right. These people that have been made heroes in our eyes historically, these are people that specifically subverted even our Constitution, that literally led us on this road to Babylon. All right? So, I know those are pretty harsh words, but it's the way it is. All right? These people were just paid politicians. They played their roles. No turn of events is more lucrative for an international banker than war, because nothing generates more government borrowing faster. Now, I think we're all witness to that, especially after the September 11th thing, right? It wasn't one day after. Same day. $40 billion allocated by Congress to fight terrorism. Isn't that something? $40 billion. You lose 2 towers. I think they're insured for $1.6 billion apiece, each building. That was the figure they gave. 1.6. So that's about little over $3 billion, right? You lose $3 billion, but you make $40 billion. Same day. What a sweet deal, huh? Then naturally nobody wants to get on airplanes, so $15 billion bailout. Huh? Isn't that something? This is wonderful business, isn't it? International banking was probably best epitomized by the Rothschilds, Europe's most famous financial dynasty. Now, we've already read about these people. Last sentence of that chapter says, or of that paragraph says, as national creditors, they earn tremendous political influence. This is what it's all about. It isn't about making money. It's political influence. They want to rule the world. Essential to controlling a government is the establishment of a central bank with a monopoly on the country's supply of money and credit. Meyer Rothschild is said to have remarked, let me issue and control the nation's money, and I care not who writes its laws, because they're irrelevant. As Gary Allen related in his bestseller, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, the Bank of England, Bank of France, Bank of Germany were not owned by their respective governments, as everyone imagines, but were privately owned monopolies granted by the heads of state, usually in return for loans. So heads of state literally sold out their whole countries to these international bankers. Georgetown professor Carroll Quigley, who himself was close to the establishment, dealt extensively with central banks in his 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope. He wrote, it must not be felt that these heads of the world's chief central banks were substantive powers in world finance. They're not. Rather, they were technicians and agents of the dominant investment bankers of their own countries, who had raised them up and were perfectly capable of throwing them down. Quigley further noted, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreement arrived at by frequent private meetings and conferences. Now, we're going to read a lot more about these feudal fashions, but if you remember, one of their goals is literally to, as these enlightened elite, they're going to be the ones that dole the land. Now, if anybody understands the feudal system, the king sits in his castle, everybody else works for the king. All right? That's why I say, you get educated or you wear a jumpsuit. That's what this New World Order stuff is about. Keep in mind, this whore sleeps with anybody, so you're going to have a lot of churches. They're going to embrace this woman. The Rothschilds, as the foremost power behind the throne of Europe's central banks, savored the thought of a similar arrangement in the United States, because they didn't have it yet. According to Gustavus Myers in his History of the Great American Fortunes, under the surface, the Rothschild long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were in power in the old Bank of the United States. However, the Bank of the United States in 1816 1836, at an early attempt to saddle the nation with privately controlled central bank, it was abolished by President Andrew Jackson. He declared, the bold effort the present bank has made to control the government, the distress it had wantonly produced, are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it. Now, Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, takes on a different position in history if you understand his opposition to this as well as Lincoln's. America heeded Jackson's warnings for the remainder of the century. The tide began to turn, however, with the linking of European and U.S. banking industries and the growth of the power in America by money barons such as J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Bernard Baruch. In 1902, German banker Paul Warburg, an associate of the Rothschild, migrated to the United States. He soon became a partner in America's most powerful banking firm, Kuhn, Lieb & Company. He was married to the daughter of Solomon Lieb, one of its founders. The head of Kuhn Lieb was Jacob Schiff, whose family ties with the Rothschilds went back a century. Paul Warburg becomes important. He comes from Germany, marries Jacob Schiff's daughter, but he becomes the first president of the American Federal Reserve Bank. Now, how does a German guy who marries into a, I guess, early banking patrician family become the most powerful man in the United States? How's that happen? While earning an annual salary of $500,000, a tidy sum even by today's standard, Paul Warburg lectured widely, published pamphlets for on the need for an American central banking system. Panic of 1917 1907 was artificially triggered to elicit public acceptance of the idea. Snowballing bank runs began after J.P. Morgan spread rumors about the insolvency of the Trust Company of America. 1949, historian Frederick Lewis Allen reported in Life magazine, certain chroniclers have arrived at the ingenious conclusion that the Morgan interest took advantage of the unsettled conditions during the autumn of 1907 to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed so that it would kill off rival banks and consolidate the preeminence of the banks within the Morgan orbit. Allen himself did not accept this explanation, but he noted, the lessons of the Panic of 1907 were clear. Though not for the same 6 years, it was destined to be embodied in legislation. The United States needed a central banking system. Congressman Charles Lindbergh, Sr., father, famous aviator, declared in 1913, the money trust caused the 1907 panic. And by the way, the money trust, circle it, draw a line under it. The money trust is actually what they refer to as the Fed. They refer to it as the establishment. There are different words that refer to these few or these elite. Now, isn't that funny? How many of you ever read about these people in newspapers? Because they still operate today. Anybody read about these guys in the newspaper? How come? Because it's their paper. All right? The whole idea of keeping a secret is not to tell nobody. All right? All right, he calls it the money trust. Caused the 1907 panic and thereby forced Congress to create a national monetary commission. Heading the commission was Senator Nelson Aldrich. Aldrich was known as the international banker's mouthpiece on Capitol Hill, so they got themselves their boy there. His daughter married John D. Rockefeller. Surprise, surprise, isn't it? Now, remember we talked about these folk, they only marry each other. All right? That whole idea is, those movies, they're nothing but bull crap. Big time CEO, he goes to the liquor store and meets a girl, waitress, falls in love and marries her. Now, if that happens, that boy ends up on Thorazine or hung. All right? Rockefeller had a kid that didn't go along with the program. They found him, hanging from a bathrobe on the towel rack. Huh? Man, if my kid tried to do a chin-up on the towel rack, it would break. Huh? Towel racks don't hold people up, but old John D. had a kid, hanging from the towel rack, dead as a doornail. People believe that crap. Huh? People believe that crap. Stuff doesn't happen. All right? These people marry each other. They're after pedigree. So John D. Rockefeller Jr. gets married to her. His grandson Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller became vice president in 1974, was named for him. And again, notice how they pop in and out of office. After the commission spent almost 2 years studying central banking in Europe, Aldrich met secretly with Paul Warburg and top representatives of Morgan and Rockefeller interests. This took place at Morgan's Hunting Club on Jekyll Island. We read a little bit about Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. There the plan was formulated for America's central bank that would come to be known as the Federal Reserve. One of those in attendance at Jekyll Island was Frank Vanderlip, president of Rockefeller's National City Bank. 25 years later, Vanderlip wrote in the Saturday Evening Post, and we've already read this. Let's see, next paragraph. After the Jekyll Island meeting, Senator Aldrich proposed a plan to Congress. His connections to the banking establishment raised enough suspicion that the Aldrich bill did not pass, but a similar measure under another name was subsequently pushed through. The Federal Reserve became law December 1913. Now, I think I have it in another set of papers. It's called Now, one of the things that's going to get people really weird, you got a book called Rule by Secrecy, Shadows of Power, Pawns in the Game, Federal Reserve Conspiracy. When you get titles like this, what's the first thing people think? Huh? Y'all nuts. Let me ask you this. Is this a conspiracy or what? Huh? When you have a small group of people that literally run the whole planet, what other word is there for what they're doing? So because these books have names like Rule by Secrecy, the Federal Reserve Conspiracy, Pawns in the Game, Secrecy, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, Secrets of the Temple. When you start reading these books, Shadows of Power, what ideas go through your head? Huh? That it's just foolish, just gander going on, just, conspiracy theorists, just nuts out there talking. Exactly. And if that's the case, in fact, here's probably the most famous of the books. None dare call it conspiracy. Runaway, man, they couldn't do nothing about this. 5 million books sold. I mean, people started finding things out. In fact, as a result of this book, they had to start a new group called the Trilateral Commission to be the front organization for the CFR, because now they needed to be out publicly. So when you hear the titles of these things, immediately people say, oh, you're one of those. Now, isn't that something that people will say that to you? You know, when you know this stuff, you can't talk to people about this because they think you're a nut. They got their head so far in the sand, they ain't never going to see daylight, and you're trying to talk to them, and they don't understand. This stuff's all a conspiracy. So when you write about it, you got to call it conspiracy. Anywhere in the Federal Reserve conspiracy, what it does, it has a timeline, and because Truman, or it wasn't Truman, it was Woodrow Wilson, he actually agreed to sign the note, but he wasn't ready to do it right before Christmas. But they pushed it through. Now, that book has a timeline of events that I got copies of that, so we'll make them when we get there. But there's a timeline of events that show that even these individuals, they're smart. The Aldrich bill, it didn't go through the first time. When it came back as the Federal Reserve bill the second time, it passed. But when did it come in? Right before Christmas. December 1913. When you start looking at the timeline, you realize that as you start reading the memoirs of Woodrow Wilson, he wasn't ready to sign it. He said, I didn't know. Everybody signed it. We got to get off for Christmas. And he just signed the thing. Federal Reserve law became law in December 1913. Ostensibly, the system was to act as a guardian of reserves for banks. It was granted control over interest rates and the size of the national money supply. That's despite the fact that it was constitutionally established in our Constitution that only the state has the right under the Constitution to coin and to mint money. The public was induced to accept the Fed by claims that given these powers it would stabilize the economy, prevent further panics and bank runs. It did nothing of the kind. Not only has our nation suffered through the Great Depression and numerous recessions, but inflation and federal debt, negligible problem before the Fed came into existence, have plagued America ever since. Congressman Lindbergh was one of the most forthright opponents of the Federal Reserve Act. He warned Congress, this act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. The money power overalls the legislative and executive forces of the nation and of the states, meaning they'll have more power. I've seen these forces exert during the different stages of this bill. This is the Aldrich bill in disguise. That's what it was. Later, Congressman Lewis McFadden, who chaired the House Committee on Bank and Currency from 1920 to 31, would declare, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of these United States did not perceive that a world banking system was set up here. A superstate controlled by international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. Does that sound like America to you? Now, if this is factual history, how come nobody ever teaches it to you? Because it's a secret. Every effort has been made by the Fed to conceal its powers, but the truth is, the Fed has usurped the government. The average American does not know or even think very much about our Federal Reserve System, but a few things should be noted about it. Although it's called federal, it's privately owned. This has nothing to do with you. Your taxes have nothing to do with it. It has never received a meaningful audit from independent sources. It makes its own policies and isn't subject to the President or the Congress. Private banks within the system select 2/3 of the directors of the Federal Reserve, of the 12 Federal Reserve banks, but the Federal Reserve Board chooses the rest. As to the Federal Reserve Board itself, its members are appointed by the President. And the fact that they're appointed by the President, you'll find that the way this was established means nothing. The Federal Reserve Board itself, its members are appointed by the President, approved by the Senate. But once in office, they serve 14-year terms. Federal chairmen have routinely come from New York banking community on its own recommendations, and the great majority have been members of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. Paul Warburg was appointed to the original board, and Benjamin Strong of the Morgan Interests, who had been at Jekyll Island with him, headed the New York Fed, the system's nucleus. How did the Federal Reserve benefit the financiers who secretly designed it? First, in its capacity of an overseer of suppliers of reserves, it gave banks access to the public funds of the U.S. Treasury, enhancing their capacity to lend and collect interest. So circle that. It gave the banks access to public funds of the U.S. Treasury. You know what that means? The banks have full access to all our tax money. As we pay all our tax money, who gets the benefit of it? The banks. It's got to go somewhere. Now, let's say it's April 15th, and everybody waited to the last minute and sent in all their tax money on April 15th. Now, understanding how banking works, by maintaining a small portion of reserve, you can lend out several times on the amount of reserves, and you get to keep the money. It's pretty slick, huh? So they now have control over the nation's money supply and interest rates. And that's their economic life. The next paragraph. Furthermore, by staffing the Federal Reserve management with themselves or their associates, the international bankers gain effective control over the nation's money supply and the interest rates, and thus over its economic life. Indeed, the Fed is authorized to create money, thus inflate, at will. According to the Constitution, only Congress may issue money or regulate its value. The Federal Reserve Act, however, placed these functions in the hands of private bankers to their perpetual profit. Congressman Lindbergh explained this new law creates inflation. Whenever the trusts want inflation, it may not do so immediately, but the trusts want a period of inflation because all the stocks they hold have gone down. Now, if the trust can get another period of inflation, they figure they can unload the stocks on the people at high prices during the excitement and then bring on a panic to buy them back at low prices. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed, and this few years removed did happen in 1929. Now, we're going to stop there because we're out of time. What you want to do is, let's see, there's probably a couple pages left of there. How many pages do you have left in there? 2? I left it off on, Woodrow Wilson? League of Nations? Okay. Woodrow Wilson, there's a book, it's called The Strangest Relationship in History. And it's the relationship between Colonel House and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, in fact, Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt, whose administration followed, had absolutely no original ideas in their presidency, none. Colonel House, a Texan, that was actually part of this inner group, wrote a book, it's called Philip Drew Administrator. It's referred to as probably the most powerful political tract of the 20th century. Every one of his ideas has actually come to pass in our society because these individuals have been using this as the pattern. And Philip Drew Administrator basically means he's not a president, he's not an elected official, he is an administrator. He is the top of the heap, he is the enlightened one. He doles out the land, he doles out the job, he doles out everything. And this is exactly what our government has been moving towards. The idea that somebody needs to take care of the widow, somebody needs to take care of the orphan, that somebody needs to give women equal rights, that somebody needs to, take care of everything. This is the whole idea, this is the whole notion behind Colonel House's political tract. As we read about these administrations, you're going to find out that none of their policies were their own ideas or their own thinking. And this is nothing more than probably conspiracy at the worst of the worst type. You might even wonder what the heck this has to do with anything. This is where we're going to bring ourselves up to speed, at least as to what Babylon is and why God hates it so much.